questions is just in general. In what ways is when this document created adding value? So I tried to kind of build up. So it's like, okay, this is a very specific VLOPC question. Now here's a one that's a little broader. So I'm also curious to see once they get to the slightly broader question, how they handle that.
Yeah.
I think as long as they are engaged and trying, that they'll be able to do it. But I really just don't know yet. This is the first time I've done a DBQ with this group.
Okay.
So I've never seen them do a DBQ yet. We've done like lots of argumentative essays and lots of other like comparative things, but just like a DBQ, we have not done. So this is my first time seeing how they're going to do with it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll get lots of feedback from it to think about, what to do moving forward. So just a couple of things that I would share with you in terms of what I saw, maybe things to think about. So one obviously is the pacing that we talked about. I think in the virtual world this is a 3-day lesson. And one day is just like you said, kind of slowing it down and reviewing the VLP or VO, all the P's, all the letters, and kind of doing a quick overview of the documents so they kind of know what they are. And then maybe the second day is them actually like getting the time to kind of like spend and also getting familiar with their group, because that was the other thing that took a little bit of time as well, was that because it was random grouping, which is fine, it took them a little bit to kind of figure out who was doing what, at least for the group that I was observing. And so by the time they figured it out, the countdown had already started for them to come back. So they had really had like no time that first time to really even like discuss what they were supposed to do. So when they got back in the second time, they spent the first few minutes of that time sort of discussing what your instructions were and what they were supposed to do. And it took them a little while to get started. And that might have just been my group, because the group that shared out at the end, Ellie's group, they were on it. Like they were, but my group is a little bit slower with that. And so there's that either means giving them more time or being more strategic in terms of the grouping, like understanding, Natalie is kind of a go-getter, but the other three were kind of more laid back and needed a little bit more of a push. And I imagine that other groups probably had similar makeups as well, where they probably had one or two kids who were pretty clear as to what they were doing, and others who needed just a little bit more like push. So just thinking about grouping and strategies around that is something to think about. But as I mentioned, I think, and that would be day 2, is just kind of letting them wrestle with the documents and doing the answering. And then it'd be really interesting to see, like on the third day, responding to that actual question at the end that you have there, which is the prompt. And seeing how the different groups responded, and having the groups have a conversation about why they have different responses, or why different kids have different responses, would be really interesting to think about as well, just as an extension piece. You might not have time for that, and that's fine, but it is something to think about in terms of allowing the kids to sort of question each other about the documents outside of the groups that they're in. Because I imagine that different groups are going to have wildly different, or maybe not, but different groups will have different interpretations of the questions for each of those documents. And it'd be interesting to have the groups kind of defend why they have the answers that they have. Again, nothing wrong inherently with your lesson. I actually really like the way that you have it set up, but just another way to think about increasing that student engagement, and allowing them opportunities to question themselves, because I know that's a big part of scoring well on the rubric, is making sure that the kids have opportunities to ask each other questions, and you ask them really good questions along the way as well. And it's also, if you stretch it out like one more day, it would give you some time to pop in with the groups and spend a little bit more time. There was one moment where you popped into our group for a second, and they asked you something in the chat, and you asked it really quickly, and then you popped out to get to another group, and someone asked another question, but you had already left. You were gone. And they were like, oh, she left already. And so, it's just the nature of this virtual world, is that, in a normal classroom, they could raise their hand and be like, hey, Miss Wilson, can you come back? And you'd pop right back over. But in the virtual world, it's just it's just that much harder to navigate. So
Yeah.